It's the New England Take. I'm your host, AJ Kierstead. TheNewEnglandTake.com to get more from the show, and TheNewEnglandTake@gmail.com if you want to reach out. Always looking for guests and partners for the new site that I'm putting together. Excited to be joined today by New Hampshire State Senator Dan Innis. He represents District 7. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you caught some headlines this week. I'm not sure if that was your goal with what happened, but you sure caught them. And so the main headline that caught my attention and why I wanted to have you on is the Boston Globe, in a very uncharitable look at the law that was voted on this week in the New Hampshire Senate. Boston Globe headline is New Hampshire Senate passes bill that would force teachers to out transgender kids to their parents. Do you agree with that being uncharitable?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, that is not what the bill does. It doesn't target trans students. It's not anti-anyone. If anything, it's pro-parent, it's pro-family, it's pro-child. And the bill is structured such that if a parent makes an inquiry, they ask the school, what's going on with my kid? The school needs to tell them. It's that simple. Nowhere does it say if a kid is transitioning, if a child has X issue, does the school need to actually reach out to the parents? But if the parents ask, the school needs to tell them. In my own experience, coming out is a hard thing. And, as I mentioned in testimony, at age 13, I knew something was really up. And, children can't really navigate that on their own. It was a different time when I experienced some of these things, and much more difficult to come out or to be open with your parents than it is today. But it's still difficult. I don't want to diminish the struggle that a lot of young people have. But the parent knows the child better than any teacher possibly could. And parents love their children. And while there might be an initial reaction to a child that says, I'm transitioning or I'm gay or whatever, at the end, the parent loves their child, wants their child to be happy and successful. And I think that's normally the case.
Yeah, there's like this instant assumption. For anyone, just to be clear, we're talking about Senate Bill 272,
Right.
which was approved by the New Hampshire Senate this week. It'll continue down the legal process in the coming weeks or months. But a lot of the opposition is just so aggressive when it comes to this. It's very much of, if this student is if their parents find out through the school, there's like assumptions of abuse that's going to happen. These kids are going to get beaten. It's like so terrible.
In a lot of ways, it's almost insulting to parents. It's
Yes.
saying, we don't trust you to do what's best for your kid. We trust the school and the teachers. And that's just not the way it should be. The parents are number one. And the best thing for a child is to have two loving parents working with them through the things that all of us work through as teenagers. It's not easy to be a teenager at any time. It's probably even harder today with the influence of social media and all of the other things that really put pressure on our children. So this bill is designed to help parents, to help families, and ultimately to help children in school. And it's not designed to pit teachers against parents. You hear that rhetoric as well. That's just not true. That's not the objective in any way. The objective is to let parents know what's happening in the schools and what's happening with their children. It's that simple.
How far back did this bill start on getting created? Because in the big reason why I think this has especially been catching a lot of headlines recently was some issues with Manchester's high school with regards to parents not. They literally had policy saying they didn't have to tell the parents what was going on in the situation. I can't find the list of schools. I want to say reporter Damian Fisher reported on it, listed like 10 different schools across the state that have similar policies, and I was thankful personally. My kid goes to the Concord School District. This big thing. Everyone knows how libertarian I lean. I support the public education system. I think it's vitally important to how our culture is cohesive and offers a decent education. And this is one of those instances where it's kind of, where in my opinion, school policy is overstepping what should be happening, and I'm personally happy to see this bill.
Well, and I think that's it. I think during COVID, a lot of parents came to understand what was happening in the schools, and they had some concerns around that. And it really started to grow at that point. And then schools started to push back a little bit with the examples that you cite. And we saw parents coming together and saying, this needs to stop and let's do something about it. And I heard a lot about this when I was campaigning for the Senate, both in the primary and the general election. This, parent rights, getting parents re-engaged with the schools and working as partners with teachers is what the people of this state want. And that's what this bill is trying to provide to them. We want to help.
Uh, how much change ended up happening to this bill? So often when they get proposed, there's changes when it goes to committee and everything like that. Is it basically pretty consistent?
It's pretty clean. It's pretty much as it was at the beginning. We send it over to the House, so we'll see what happens with it from here. My hope is that the House will work through this and pass it, and I do believe the governor will sign it. But the House is always a question. It's a close balance over there, and we'll see. But what really struck me is that a lot of the outreach that came to me has been bipartisan. It's been both sides of the aisle. Because when it comes to our kids, politics should be taken out of it. And that's really what we're trying to do here, is take politics out of it, get parents back into it, and make school all about learning the things that will help a student to be successful in life, and not worrying about some of these other things that are really social matters that are best handled at home.
Yeah, there's been this disconnect. I feel like it was starting to happen a little bit when I was going through school. I'm 36, so back in the 2000s and the late 90s, and where you have two lives. Like, you have your life at school and you have your life at home, and I've always found that confusing, and I feel like it breeds a bit of parents unintentional laziness, but also along the same lines, there's also this hard economic situation we have in this country where often two parents do have to work. My wife had to work up until just a few years back. We're extremely fortunate that I'm able to make it work. I'm the only parent that has to work. It's the parents need to be involved.
And that's a good point that you make. People are busy, they have a lot going on, and it's sometimes hard to be involved in every aspect of your child's life. And you probably don't need to be,
Right.
But you do have that right to know what's happening with them at school. And the kid may not always tell you. One of the things, though, that I think about here is, wouldn't you rather, as a parent, ask the school, is my child transitioning? Is my child gay? Is my child lesbian? And find out that way, or from your child, rather than from a neighbor or a friend or another kid. And the fact is, if someone is dressing differently at school, maybe changing clothes on the way or when they get there, or just behaving very differently, you're effectively out. You're out as a trans person, you're out as a gay person, you're out as a lesbian. And that's going to get back to the parents. And the parents don't want to hear it that way. You don't want the phone call from the neighbor that says, hey, I heard that Dan's, wearing pink socks at school. And the parent doesn't even know that Dan had pink socks. I don't. But you get my point. Let's keep this in the family. Let's keep it between the parents and the children where it really belongs, and handle it that way.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's this disconnect. I feel like this has gotten wrapped up in such of the national debate so much, where it's unfortunate because I mean, ultimately, when you really think about it, think about your kids, or if you had a kid, what would you want to have happen? Don't this assumption of always the absolute worst case scenario, when also there are laws out there where if that is an abusive relationship, teachers have a process to do that.
And I would point out that this bill provides for that. If there's any perception in the school that this child might face a situation that's dangerous to them, emotionally, physically, or otherwise, they don't have to report that. So we're trying to protect the children on both sides of this. And I think this bill's pretty successful in doing so. I'm confident it does the right thing and that it's really going to help in the long run.
New Hampshire State Senator Dan Innis, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. Have a great weekend and a happy St. Patrick's Day.
You too. So the New England Take, I'm your host, AJ Kierstead.